December 16, 1944, 5:30 hours. Führerbunker, Berlin. A single decoded transmission from the Ardennes would shatter 3 years of carefully constructed illusions about industrial warfare. What the German High Command read in that message would force them to confront a truth they had spent the entire war denying. America hadn't been fighting at full capacity. They had been holding back. The reinforced bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery sat 50 foot underground, insulated by concrete walls 6 feet thick. On the morning of December 16, 1944, the space hummed with the familiar rhythm of a losing war. Field Marshal Helga von Braun's morning intelligence briefing had become a ritual of managed decline. At precisely 0530 hours, Communications Officer Major Christina Weber burst through the steel door without the customary salute. In her hands, she carried a decoded transmission that would fundamentally alter how Germany's military leadership understood the war they had been fighting. The message was fragmentary, transmitted by the 6th Panzer Army before communications degraded. American counteroffensive overwhelming our positions. Air superiority absolute. Material advantage beyond calculation. Request immediate reinforcements. The transmission ended abruptly. General Emma Jodl, chief of the Wehrmacht operations staff, read the message 3 times. Her first assumption was that American forces had deployed their entire European theater strength to crush the Ardennes offensive. The mathematics seemed impossible otherwise. Germany had committed 200,000 troops and nearly every operational tank to this attack. But additional reports arriving throughout the morning told a different story. Weather reconnaissance had confirmed that American forces had responded to the German offensive with reserves that appeared limitless. Fresh divisions, new equipment, ammunition supplies that suggested no bottom to their stockpiles. Colonel Frieda Gellen, head of Foreign Armies West Intelligence, stood at the massive wall map tracking every known American military asset in Europe. Her intelligence staff had become exceptionally skilled at monitoring American operations. They knew division deployments, typical supply patterns, and expected response times. Nothing in 3 years of war suggested Americans could absorb a major offensive and counterattack within days with forces that seemed to materialize from thin air. By 10 o'clock hours, forward observation posts reported something unprecedented. American artillery barrages that continued for hours without pause. Fighter-bomber attacks in waves that suggested inexhaustible reserves. Tank columns equipped with machines that made German panzers look obsolete. Foreign Minister Anna Ribbentrop received the first comprehensive assessment at 11:30 hours from a Wehrmacht colonel who had been captured and exchanged. The woman's testimony, recorded by Ribbentrop's secretary, described American supply depots that stretched for miles. Mountains of ammunition, fuel, and equipment that dwarfed anything Germany possessed. She reported that American soldiers ate better in combat than German officers ate in Berlin. That American trucks were so numerous they used them casually, abandoning damaged vehicles rather than repairing them because new ones arrived faster than mechanics could work. The afternoon meeting of the Military High Command convened at 1400 hours in complete silence. Führer's deputy Martha Bormann, who had survived multiple purges for even suggesting realistic assessments, read the accumulated reports. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the documents on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bormann began. "We must consider what this means." General Sophia Keitel, chief of the OKW and the most ardent advocate for continuing the fight, spoke first. "American logistics are overextended. They cannot sustain these operations indefinitely. Winter will." Admiral Helene Donitz interrupted, something she would never have done in normal circumstances. "They are not overextended, Keitel. Our intelligence shows they haven't even deployed half their available divisions." Half. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like snow in a cemetery. For 3 years, German military doctrine had been built on a single premise: American industrial might could be overcome by German tactical superiority and European strategic depth. The Americans could produce more equipment, but German forces would fight with such efficiency that American material advantages would become meaningless. This calculation had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. When American factories produced thousands of aircraft monthly, Germany's leaders told themselves that German pilots, though outnumbered, would maintain kill ratios that made numbers irrelevant. When American shipyards launched Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them, Germany consoled itself that American naval inexperience would lead to catastrophic losses. But the Ardennes counteroffensive suggested something far more troubling. It suggested that American industrial and military capacity had reached levels that made German resistance not merely difficult but meaningless. It suggested that America had been fighting carefully, deliberately, while simultaneously preparing forces that dwarfed what Germany faced daily. Intelligence officer Colonel Margarethe Schellenberg presented the afternoon's analysis at 1600 hours. Her team had been calculating American industrial capacity since 1941, and their numbers had been consistently, terrifyingly accurate. America had produced 88,000 tanks during the war. Germany had produced 46,000. America had built 175 aircraft carriers and escort carriers. Germany had built 0 operational carriers. American factories had delivered trucks so rapidly that their motor pools exceeded Germany's entire vehicular strength by factors of 10. But Schellenberg's new calculation suggested something that fundamentally broke their understanding. If, she said, voice barely above a whisper, if the Americans can sustain operations on this scale while simultaneously fighting Japan across the Pacific, while supplying the Soviets and British with thousands of vehicles and aircraft, while maintaining their domestic economy at peacetime levels, then they possess industrial capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting. Foreign Minister Ribbentrop added what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. And if they can do this in 1944, after 3 years of war, we must assume they are still ramping up production. They are getting stronger while we grow weaker. The German understanding of American power had been shaped by a series of carefully constructed beliefs that began long before December 1941. These beliefs, documented in countless staff meetings and strategic assessments, would all collapse within months of the Ardennes failure. In December 1941, Reichsmarschall Helena Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, had provided assessments of American air power that reflected German prejudices rather than reality. Her declarations, recorded in Luftwaffe staff minutes, were explicit: American aircraft production is exaggerated propaganda. Their pilots lack fighting spirit. Their democracy makes them weak. Göring had never visited America. She had never studied American industrial infrastructure firsthand. Her calculations were not based on evidence but on ideological conviction that democracy produced inferior military capability. But Göring's assumptions were systematically demolished by the very staff now sitting in the bunker contemplating Germany's strategic collapse. The Wehrmacht strategic planning documents from 1941, recovered from archives after the war, revealed the alternative narrative that military leadership had embraced. American industrial might would be neutralized by 3 factors. First, inexperience. America had a tiny military in 1941. Training effective forces would take years, during which Germany could achieve decisive victories elsewhere. Second, division. American society was fractured by regional differences, ethnic diversity, and political conflict. This would manifest in military inefficiency and poor coordination. Third, comfort. Americans were soft, accustomed to luxury, incapable of sustaining the brutality of modern warfare. German soldiers, hardened by discipline and ideological commitment, would break American morale through tactical excellence. These assumptions had been tested and found catastrophically wrong at every single engagement from North Africa to Normandy. Yet German high command had consistently reinterpreted defeats as validation of their theories needing minor adjustments rather than fundamental revision. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces had achieved tactical victory against inexperienced American troops. The official assessment celebrated German tactical superiority, ignoring that Americans learned rapidly and would never make those mistakes again. At Normandy in June 1944, German forces discovered that Americans could coordinate multi-division amphibious operations with air and naval support at scales Germany had never imagined possible. The official assessment blamed poor weather and Allied air superiority, not the fundamental superiority of American logistics and coordination. By December 1944, every major assumption had been systematically demolished by reality. Yet senior leadership had never formally acknowledged this. General Keitel's continued advocacy for fighting to the last citizen represented not stupidity, but the logical endpoint of beliefs that had never been properly questioned. The afternoon of December 16 marked the first time in the entire war that Germany's military leadership confronted their illusions directly. Intelligence Colonel Schellenberg presented what she called the reality assessment, a document her team had compiled over the previous 6 months but had been prevented from presenting until now. The numbers were devastating. American aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded Germany's total production for the entire war. American factories were building heavy bombers faster than Germany could train fighter pilots. American ammunition plants produced more shells in a week than Germany's factories produced in a month. But Schellenberg's most damning statistics involved military logistics. Her intelligence network had documented American supply operations that employed over 500,000 personnel in Europe alone. Truck convoys that operated 24 hours daily. Supply depots that stocked everything from tank engines to fresh vegetables. The Americans, Schellenberg explained, have solved logistics at industrial scale. They can deliver supplies to frontline troops faster than those troops can consume them. Every American division operates with support infrastructure that exceeds our entire Army's capabilities. This is not temporary advantage. This is systematic superiority. Foreign Minister Ribbentrop asked the question that would echo through subsequent war crimes trials and historical analysis: how could we not know? Schellenberg's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about production figures. We documented their logistical capabilities. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would require acknowledging that we could not win. Admiral Donitz added her own bitter assessment. The Americans fought this war while barely mobilizing their full capacity. They maintained their civilian economy. They produced consumer goods while simultaneously producing war material at scales we cannot match even under total mobilization. They are not merely stronger than us. They represent a different category of industrial civilization. This admission, that America represented not just greater strength but a different category of capability, marked the fundamental shift in understanding. For 4 years, German propaganda had portrayed Americans as decadent and weak, dependent on material comfort because they lacked ideological strength. The Ardennes counteroffensive revealed this narrative as catastrophically wrong. The psychological impact extended beyond simple military calculation. Deputy Chief of Staff Colonel Greta von Stauffenberg recorded in her diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society functioned as ours functioned, that their limits matched our limits. The Ardennes proves we were fighting blind." December 17, 1944 began with confirmation that made the strategic situation seem even more hopeless. Reconnaissance flights over American rear areas transmitted photographs that circulated among high command within hours. Lieutenant Sarah Rudel, the pilot who flew the deepest reconnaissance mission, reported conditions she had never encountered. American air defenses so dense that penetration was nearly suicidal. Supply columns that stretched for dozens of kilometers. Airfields with hundreds of aircraft, and more arriving daily. The photographs developed by 11 o'clock hours showed something that military analysts initially refused to believe. American supply depots, each one covering square kilometers. Tank parks with hundreds of Shermans awaiting deployment. Artillery pieces stacked like cordwood. Ammunition dumps that suggested unlimited production capacity. Intelligence analysts compared these images to German logistics. Germany's entire strategic reserve, the equipment committed to the Ardennes offensive, represented less material than a single American supply depot servicing one corps. The military high command reconvened at 1400 hours on December 17 with new intelligence that fundamentally altered their remaining hope. British and American codebreakers had penetrated German communications so thoroughly that Allied forces anticipated German moves before German units executed them. This announcement shattered any remaining belief in German tactical superiority. For years, German forces had prided themselves on operational excellence. The revelation that Allies were reading their communications meant that every tactical advantage had been compromised, possibly for years. General Jodel's face, according to multiple witnesses, went pale as the implications registered. Germany faced enemies who not only possessed overwhelming material superiority but also knew German plans before German troops did. Foreign Minister Ribbentrop presented the stark reality. "We have three choices: negotiate surrender while some German territory remains intact, fight until every city is destroyed by bombing, or fight until Soviet and American forces occupy Germany completely and the nation ceases to exist. There are no other options." December 18 brought fragmentary intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army was preparing massive winter offensives with overwhelming force. Soviet tank armies, equipped with thousands of American trucks and radios provided through Lend-Lease, were positioned to sweep across Eastern Europe. The Eastern Front situation demonstrated another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were sustained by American logistics, trucks, fuel, communications equipment, even food, provided at scales that exceeded Germany's entire logistical capacity. American industrial output had not only sustained its own forces across two oceans but had also equipped Allies on scales that seemed impossible by German standards. At 15:30 hours on December 19, reconnaissance reported another massive American bomber raid on German industry. Over 2,000 heavy bombers escorted by 1,000 fighters had struck targets across Germany. The Luftwaffe managed to shoot down 27 bombers, a tactically irrelevant number when Americans could replace losses within days. The military leadership emergency session that afternoon descended into something unprecedented in German military protocol: open acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Air Force General Sophia Galland spoke with remarkable candor for an officer in that environment. "The Americans have demonstrated that they can strike any target in Germany at will. They have demonstrated the capability to continue this indefinitely. We cannot defend against formations we cannot intercept in sufficient numbers. Our fighter production is irrelevant. Our anti-aircraft systems are inadequate. Our defensive doctrine is obsolete." Army Chief of Staff General Jodl added her own assessment, one that would have been considered defeatist heresy months earlier. "American air power changes fundamental military calculations. Concentrated forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our strategy of defensive depth assumes we can trade space for time. But if Americans can destroy our industries without invasion, our entire strategic doctrine becomes obsolete." Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that American bomber forces were still expanding. Production rates suggested they could double their bombing capacity by summer 1945 while simultaneously supporting operations in the Pacific and preparing for final operations against Japan. Cabinet Secretary Ilse Lammers recorded private discussions from senior leadership that evening. "The consensus is that continued resistance will result in Germany's complete destruction. We must find terms that preserve something of the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond measure." December 20 brought formal acknowledgement from multiple field commanders that American forces possessed capabilities Germany could not match. Panzer divisions reported facing American tank destroyers with guns that penetrated any German armor. Infantry divisions reported American artillery support that operated with precision and volume that made German artillery seem obsolete. Luftwaffe pilots reported American fighters with performance that rendered German aircraft increasingly obsolete. The formal discussions of potential peace terms extended through late December and into January 1945, but the psychological transformation of German high command was complete by Christmas. What followed was not merely military defeat but a comprehensive re-evaluation of everything German leadership had believed about modern warfare, industrial capacity, and their own place in the global order. Intelligence Colonel Schellenberg compiled her final assessment in early 1945, titled, "Why We Lost, An Assessment of Strategic Miscalculation." The document, later preserved in Allied archives, provided brutal honesty. "We lost the war in December 1941 when we declared war on an enemy we did not understand. Every battle thereafter was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors we refused to acknowledge. Their logistical systems were superior to anything we developed. Their scientific establishment produced innovations continuously while our research suffered from ideological constraints. We fought believing ideology could overcome material. We fought believing tactical excellence could defeat strategic superiority. We fought believing our enemies were weak because we needed them to be weak. We were wrong about everything." The American occupation forces arriving in 1945 provided German officials with information that confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,000 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,400,000 trucks, and quantities of ammunition that exceeded Germany's total production in every category, while simultaneously maintaining civilian prosperity that exceeded German peacetime standards. Former Deputy Chief of Staff von Stauffenberg, in conversations recorded by American occupation historians, articulated what German leadership had finally grasped. "We thought we were fighting a nation of shopkeepers and farmers who lacked martial spirit. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible." Admiral Donitz's final assessment, written in 1946 for Allied historians, captured the complete reversal of German military thinking. "We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disorganized. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong, but precisely backwards." The psychological impact on military leadership manifested in various ways. Some, like certain SS officers, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. Others became advocates for complete demilitarization, arguing that German militaristic culture had led to catastrophic strategic blindness. German historians working under occupation supervision began documenting how thoroughly intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American capabilities had been suppressed as harmful to morale. Evidence that Germany was losing had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks requiring more determination. The final lesson German high command absorbed was perhaps the bitterest: American power had not been fully deployed. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while maintaining substantial forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, and preparing for conflicts that might follow. The crushing material superiority Germany faced represented not America's maximum effort but what they could accomplish while simultaneously doing a dozen other things. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with former German military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Jodl's testimony to occupation historians summarized what German high command had finally understood. "We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, ideological rigidity, when they possessed the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The Ardennes failure was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended. We learned too late that ideology cannot defeat industry, that tactical excellence cannot overcome strategic superiority, and that determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form."